Welcome to Planet Poet Words in Space. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, and my guest is the wonderful poet, writer, and visual artist, Anique Sara Taylor, here today to read from and discuss her new award-winning chapbook, Civil Twilight. Also joining us later today to bring us her unique insights into poetry and poets, as well as the latest in poetry news, is Planet Poet's poet at large, poet and visual artist Pamela Manché Pearce. Hi, Anique, and great to have you back on the show. I'm going to read from your bio for everybody. Anique Sara Taylor's chapbook, Civil Twilight, won the 2022 Blue Light Poetry Prize. Her full-length poetry book, Where Space Bends, was published in May 2020 by Finishing Line Press. Anique's other chapbooks include When Black Opalescent Birds Still Circled the Globe, chosen finalist by Harbor Review's inaugural 2023 Jewish Women's Prize, Feathered Strips of Prayer Before Morning, chosen finalist by Minerva Rising, Chapbook Competition 2023, and Cobblestone Mist, long-listed finalist for the 2023 Harbor Edition's Marginalia series. Her Holocaust poem, The Train, was a 2019 finalist in the Charter Oak Award for Best Historical Poem. Wow, Anique, that is wonderful.
Thank you.
I'd like to start with you reading a poem. Would you like to do that?
I would love to do that. Thank you.
Great.
It's an honor to be here, Sharon.
Oh,
So this is called Space Capsule Chronicles. Silver halo of skin, human silhouette ebony against solar eclipse. Pilot past yellow umbrellas, cantilevered constellations, blossoming glass clouds spread, and elliptical galaxies. Until you can unlock forgotten secrets of breath.
that's Anique Sara Taylor reading from her book, her chapbook, Civil Twilight, and that was Space Capsule Chronicles. That silver halo of skin is so original, Anique, and you take us through the constellations and back to human breath, which is so expansive and beautiful. Anique, would you discuss the shape of the book? It's 30 words and 30 poems.
Yes. So I was doing a creative nonfiction book, which involved walking around town, and I had sunlight, sunrise, and sunset times. And in that point, I discovered with some scientific research, there were 3 different kinds of twilight. There was civil, nautical, and astronomical. And I'll talk more about that maybe, but at 5, so civil twilight is when the sun is 6 degrees below the horizon and it's neither light nor dark and only the brightest stars can be seen. And it occurred to me that it was around 5:30 in the morning, and at twilight, someplace in the world, it was also a personal number. So I thought, what about making poems that were 5 lines with 30 poems each? And all of my work is very, very, very long lines. So this was a real sculpted project that was difficult for me. And so the 30 poems, 30 lines was a project.
That's wonderful. It's so from 5:30, from the twilight and dawn. That's also the crepuscular time when deer and other animals function during the edges between light and dark. I love that whole edges. So that's how the book came about. We had a discussion, one of many, because Anique and I are close friends, about how Anique writes. And part of this, you talked about that the work was a collage. And you said something very interesting, that you have, or there are hidden rules and long feeling lines. I think that's particular for this project. You have these are very rich little gems that encompass worlds, really. And could you describe what you mean by hidden rules when you write?
Thank you. I wanted um, I wanted these poems, even though there were 30 lines, which is the smallest poem I've ever worked with, to have the feeling of full long lines and length. I wanted them, so I had the hidden rules. I wanted them to have phrases. I wanted some of the phrases to be long or compound, and then to have ones that were more staccato or short. I wanted the poems to have a larger emotional impact, to bring in features that included scientific research. So I didn't want a simple poem. I wanted something that felt like a full long poem.
Mm-hmm.
And it ended up, like almost being a distillation without being distilled.
Oh, absolutely no distillation here. It's sort of the opposite with few words. I don't know how you do that, but you create largeness within this very small form, 5 lines. And it's very percussive, very musical. I want to read an excerpt from Michael Waters' comments about Civil Twilight. These brief poems filled line by line with such rich diction. Her formal gestures, 30 words, 5 lines, keep the poems taut and with stresses. The insistent spondees throughout emphasize the emotional resonance underlying the book. Shy mouth nailed shut, sheets creased white, cockroach shells, quill-shaped mist, bones break naked, beaks crave rain. So many lovely phrasings, all toward expressing and containing the undercurrent of grief. Bittersweet, she says, yes. It's a wonderful depiction of your book from Michael Waters. And a spondee it just means that 3 words emphasized in equal proportion following one another. A dactyl is the first syllable is accented, but a spondee is all equal accents, and that I think works to elongate the line. It creates space. Correct? Am I correct?
It does. It's a percussive thing. That's how I see it. I grew up studying classical piano and modern dance, and I taught myself to sing when I was just a few years old. And so music is deep inside me. And I love the idea of putting into these very compact, small poems a very long phrase and then a ba-boom. And so there were also the rock and roll parties in the driveway with the 45s. And so some of the ba-boom is that you take this gracious with words and repeated sounds. And I love the sounds of words. And so they spin something very long, almost hard to do with one breath. And then all of a sudden, the boom, boom, which is like a turnaround swirl and beat, because there's the grace and then there's the thunder. And I wanted all of that inside. And so that's kind of inside me.
That's one of the most expressive explanations of work that I've ever heard. Thank you. That's really says it. And Anique, I was going to ask you to read that poem again, but maybe our listeners could find those spondees and dactyls in the next poem that you're going to read.
Okay. Is that incandescent constellation?
Correct. Yes, that would be great.
Incandescent constellations. The moon's upper limb rises as the sun's hesitant center sinks 6 degrees below the horizon. Swim back from the sunset. Now only the brightest stars will ever be enough.
That's Anique Sara Taylor reading Incandescent Constellations. I mean, that the second line, as the sun's hesitant center sinks 6 degrees. And it's you feel it. You feel the sun sinking when you say that. It's very weighted. And do you have anything else to say about that particular line? I mean, when you're creating those lines, they're so immensely imaginative. Are you keeping those, what you said, in mind all the time, the phrasing and the percussive elements of your work, or is it just there? Or you think about it and then you let yourself go when you create?
What a great question. Well, they tried to tame me in art school, in poetry school, and they tried to get me to write short lines. And the thing is that there's something in me that drives towards that and keeps wanting it. And I want the up and down of the phrase. And I want, if you look at it on the paper, it's very, very hard to read. The first sentence is 3 lines. The moon's upper limb rises as the sun's hesitant center sinks 6 degrees below the horizon. So it's very hard to do with one breath.
Yes.
And
yes.
It has many parts. And when I work alone in the morning and no one's telling me to behave, the sentences are very long, and there's something inside me that keeps pulling towards that. And I think different poets have different things that keep pulling them. And that's one thing that I keep returning to.
Thank you, Anique. It's also, again, as you described Civil Twilight, the sun's hesitant center sinks 6 degrees below the horizon. So there you are, bringing in the title of the book again in this. And there's something so poignant about now only the brightest stars will ever be enough. There is, as Michael Waters had commented, there's a lot of undercurrent of grief and of loss. And can you talk a little bit about the connection between loss and light in this poem?
Another good question. This brings in, the light is sinking here. Mm-hmm. And my father was dying, and he weaves through it. But loss is not just loss of one person. We all have loss of different kinds. And I think that stays with us, not always the original pain of it. Mm-hmm. My father did die while swimming in the twilight, and that was part of what's going on in the book. But one of the things that happens with loss is now only the brightest stars will ever be enough. And that's a very metaphorical way of saying when we undergo loss, we need some light. We need something to carry us through.
Something strong.
Or beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you, Anique. I'm going to read from another poet's comments about your book, Civil Twilight, Anique. And this is from another poet who we like very much, Tina Barry. And Anique Taylor Anique Sara Taylor's Civil Twilight, which won the 2022 Blue Light Poetry Prize, is comprised of 33 word poems. I could offer 30 word poems. I could offer up any of them as examples of the author's linguistic cartwheels, which is wonderful. Taylor's poems are the brushstrokes of a master painter who isn't afraid of using neon colors when she feels like it.
So I want to thank Tina. I've written linguistic cartwheels and lipstick on my mirror.
So, Anique, I'm going to ask you to read the poem that Tina referenced in her comments, which is Innumerable Halos.
Innumerable halos. Innumerable halos. After the full moon, corals unleash spores into underwater snowstorms. Cheetahs and wild dogs stalk their prey. Nocturnal migrants, singing warblers streak past lunar splendor while scientists count vanishing silhouettes.
That is so beautiful. I was wondering, your book is so infused with the natural world.
I grew up in a forest and it was huge. It went on forever, and there were lakes and cliffs and swamps, and there was both exquisite beauty and danger. But I didn't know anything about those things. I knew them like the back of my hand, but with poetry, I started actually researching. And I became fascinated. So this poem is very deeply based on scientific research. The corals do unleash spores. And also, full moon is a time when wild animals do stalk prey. That scientists do count migrations that way. So one of the things I love to do is collage ideas. And so I took this from many separate places of different scientific facts of what happens in the full moon.
The collage is so beautiful here between the singing warblers and the cheetahs and wild dogs stalking their prey, while scientists count vanishing silhouettes. This is about climate change also. Am I wrong?
That is how they count migrations, and migrations have changed enormously. But the part that broke my heart is the part about the corals, because they are dying, and with them all of I'm not going to use the right words, but all of the different species of fish and creatures are being affected. And I have such great sadness about what is happening to the earth, and that I don't write directly about it, but that's one of the losses.
Yes, it's apparent in this book. I want to read some more comments because I think all of these comments from very, very fine writers elucidate your work in ways that I attempt to do, but I think are really very enriching for the listener too. Here's another short one from Leslie Sharpe, who is a great nature writer who wrote a book called The Quarry Fox and Other Catskill Critters. I think that's the title.
Yes.
30 poems, 30 words each, shimmer with a refined intensity at once both taut and expansive. Within this tight form, her emotional richness is as lyric as it is restrained. I find that very interesting. She talks about the voluptuousness and the restraint at the same time. Grief, shadow, loss yet love of the stubborn, simple glories of existence emerge as gifts of her inner iconography. And I wanted to ask you about the inner versus your outer iconography, if that's possible to talk about that, Anique.
Brave person to step into that. I've had many challenges, and I've had chronic illness most of my life. And so I spent a lot of time studying psychology and spirituality. And that weaves all the way through the work all the time. Um, I I believe that everything we are contributes to our creativity, everything we've been through. And strangely enough, everything we've been through is a gift if we can take it. It sometimes doesn't seem that way. But when you're creative, everything that happens inside can be used. The issue with doing that is if you write about your emotions and your feeling, the poem just gets so weighted down. And so what you want to do is you want to put just tiny bits of that, almost like spice, and have the nature metaphors carry that emotion. And so it can bring it home to other people for their own experience.
Oh, that's fantastic. Anique, I know you've been you're a wonderful teacher. And for poets who are listening, that advice is priceless to do that. And that's really, really important to know. Thank you, Anique. Anique, you were a visual artist as well as and you are a visual artist as well as a poet. And you illustrated your book as you did for Where Space Bends. So absolutely beautiful book for our listeners. It will even just to look at look it up and look at the gorgeous art that Anique was created. And you have art degrees. You have an art degree from Pratt Institute, if I'm correct. You have a degree from the Sorbonne. You have a master's from Drew University in poetry, and many certificates. So you've had a very rich life outside of poetry. And how has that influenced your poetic life, your work?
I noticed, so I have a graduate degree in art and been an artist most of my life. When I went to grad school for poetry, it was fairly recently. And they would talk about the strong imagery over and over. They would talk about the visuals and how strong they were. And I was delighted with the poetry because I could throw out a strong image. But if I did it with art, it would take me weeks. With poetry, you put out an image and it explodes in people's heads, hopefully, if it's successful. So actually, we talked about bringing in the music and then all those years of training for art. It's very strange, but it is possible to translate a skill from one art to the other. We talked about phrasing and timing. In art, there is texture, there is movement, there's color. All of that is also in poetry. So, and the spiritual work, I'm also a minister. I was a therapist. That brings in purpose and meaning and what we're here for and all those things, which again, you have to go very lightly. Otherwise, it kind of turns into, way too heavy and messy. But, again, if everything you are, if you're a mother, if you're a truck driver, if you're a plumber, if you're a meditator, everything you do is something, and in that way of importance, and can be brought in. So these are the things that I chose, that pulled me, and so they come in. And Diane Frank was kind enough to let me use my art for the cover because I spent a whole week on it for that purpose only.
It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. Anique, would you read Seagrass Airship for us, please?
Yes, that one's very visual. Okay, Seagrass Airship. Scatter regrets into the rushing waters. Falcons soar midair, interlacing transparencies to mate. Locking talons, they gyrate freefall toward the blissful intersection of heaven, river, morning, unspooling the untamed heart.
And that has so much movement in it. Seagrass airship from earth to air in 3 words. And there are the more of dactyls, I think, scatter regrets into the rushing waters. Falcons soar mid-air. It's again, stately is not quite the word for it, but it makes the reader, especially when you read it out loud, hover a little bit, enjoy everything a little bit. There's a little caesura that's created that's beautiful. Could you read it again for us?
I'd love to.
Yeah.
Seagrass airship. Scatter regrets into the rushing waters. Falcons soar midair, interlacing transparencies to mate. Locking talons, they gyrate freefall toward the blissful intersection of heaven, river, morning, unspooling the untamed heart.
That makes me very happy, Anique. I like that poem.
Thank you, Sharon.
I want to live there. I want to live in that blissful intersection of heaven, river, and
well, I do live a block away from the Esopus Creek, which is a gorgeous river. And I want to say about is that there are many accidents that happen when you have a writing practice, and I sort of I don't know how I found us. I was something about weaving, and then I saw spooling, and I thought, oh, what about unspooling? And I fell in love with that.
Thank you so much. You're listening to Planet Poet Words in Space on WIOX Community Radio, live and local in the Catskills. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, here with my guest, the exceptional poet and visual artist, Anique Sara Taylor. And joining us now from Manhattan is Planet Poet's Poet at Large, poet and visual artist Pamela Manché Pearce. Pamela, a Pushcart Prize nominee, is finding inspiration for ekphrastic poems as she attends recent openings of New York City art galleries. Hi, Pamela.
Hello, Sharon. Hi, Anique. I'm so happy to be here. And Anique, I have to tell you that you keep pitching these unforgettable images over and over. I feel really enchanted by them in the truest sense of that word. So thank you. This is a wonderful, wonderful time for me. And I'm going to take my 10 minutes and then I'm going to listen to you again. So I am working on a 3-part series here about copyright. And often in my life, I have found that I start with something that's very dry, and as I explore it, it gets very juicy. So this copyright issue has become very juicy for me as I explore it. One of the reasons for bringing this to Planet Poet is that the question arises over and over again is as to which poems can I read on air in their entirety without anybody being penalized or having to pay a royalty. What a lot of people don't know is that public domain begins 70 years after the death of the poet or 95 years after publication. If, for example, the estate has not renewed the copyright or the publisher. So this opens up all of these people who have been either dead 70 years or the poem has been out of publication for 95 years. As I began to scratch and I wanted to find out more about this, of course, I went back in history. And those of you who know me, either personally or professionally, know that I really love history. and also that I'm an ardent Philhellene. So, of course, the first place I went was ancient Greece, or the material took me to ancient Greece. And I found out that during the 6th century, when things began to open up and the new idea of the individual self began to emerge, this included ideals, ambitions, and creativity. And this was the bud of the idea of copyright, of protecting the rights of the creator of a particular piece of work. And Talmudic law also comments on the moral rights of the individual writer, as well as their economic and property rights. Now, I made an attempt to read some Talmudic law about this. And I, as poet at large, I'll do practically anything. But I really got lost. So that's for someone else. Go for it. It's very interesting. And how it describes intellectual property and what that means to a person is absolutely fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. So this was all happening in the ancient world, the little bud of this idea of copyright. And then something very big happened in 6th century Ireland. There was one document called the Cathach, which is a psalter, and is the first manuscript created in Ireland. It's very, very precious. There was a monk whose name now is Saint Columba, who asked to borrow this very precious document from a man named Finian. And he took it back to his cell to copy it, with permission to copy it. And something happened. He described a miraculous flood of light in his dark cell, and it was illuminated beyond anything he could imagine. And this allowed him to copy this document all night. Well, what happened is that St. Columba got very frisky, and he wasn't happy just to copy the psalm like everyone else had been doing for centuries. He wanted to comment about it. So he wrote a little interpretive sentence or two up at the top of each psalm. And when Finian found out about this, Finian went nuts. Because, well, he did. Because he said, I gave you the right to copy the document, but not to change it and not to monkey with it at all.
Pamela, I just have to say, what research?
Oh, it's so much fun. I know how to have fun. I know people say that Pamela, she really knows how to have fun.
That's real fun for us.
Well, we're not done yet. There you go. All right. Well, so anyway, it absolutely. So this goes beyond this. And what happens is that the fight is so big between Finian feels so ripped off. And St. Columba was saying, was saying that he didn't do anything wrong, even though he probably knew he did something wrong. It went into a huge dispute over ownership of this copy, and they had to bring it to King Diarmid, who was the king of Ireland at the time, and to make a judgment about this. King Diarmid's sentence about this has gone down through history as a cornerstone of copyright law. And this is the sentence, quote, to every cow belongs the calf. Therefore, to every book belongs its copy, end quote.
Wow.
This resulted in a real battle, a physical battle where many people died. Some estimates are that around 500 people died, and some estimates are that around 3,000 people died. So this was a very, very big deal in ancient Ireland.
People were fighting about this.
Yes, it became a real who was on the side of St. Columba and who was on the side of Finian, and disputing the king's dictum, and it was a very, very big deal. So that's 6th century Ireland. Then we can only imagine that in the 15th century, when Gutenberg Press really got cranking, someone woke up one morning and said, hey, I can make some money off this stuff, meaning the stuff being books that they were printing. And then there became a discussion about who has the right to the book. How does that happen when all of these copies are made and they're sold, and who's profiting from them? This percolated in Europe over a couple of centuries, and finally in the UK, they got a hold of this. And the next big cornerstone in copyright was the Statute of Saint Anne in 1710. And this is big. It gave protection to a book already in print of 14 years. A new book would have 14 years of protection before it had to be renewed. Or a book that had already been produced would get 21 years of protection. So that's the Statute of Saint Anne. Of course, what was happening in the UK eventually made its way across the Atlantic to the United States. And the framers of our Constitution took this very, very seriously, this idea of what we're calling copyright. And it was James Madison who introduced it to the Constitution, calling it to secure literary authors their rights for a limited time. And for the first time, this was known as the Intellectual Property Clause. Congress included this as the Copyright Act of 1790, and then George Washington signed it into law. We are still chewing on this. Copyright has never ended, and the discussion about copyright is endless. And in my next segment, the next time I'm on, I'm going to look into a Vanderbilt Law Review article, 36 pages, from Jennifer Understall, and the title of this is Copyright Infringement and Poetry. When is a red wheelbarrow the red wheelbarrow? It's a fascinating discussion about copyright. So we're going to pull that apart next time.
You did a brilliant job. What you did was so clear.
Thank you.
So clear, and such a long history of this issue. Fabulous. And we go through this as poets too.
We sure do.
I mean, Anique, you're reading your poems that are published. They're protected. It's different if you were reading new work. And when this goes on a podcast, I wouldn't want my work that's unpublished to be out there like that. Right? I mean, there's all kinds. I'm not sure of the legal technicalities of it.
That's true, because if it's published on a podcast, it's already considered published, so you can't send it out to a publisher.
That's a real big deal.
It's a very big deal.
And it limits people who haven't been published, because they can't share work in progress. And it's so wonderful to share work in progress.
Yes. It's true. And new poets don't realize you can't post on Facebook. You can't post on Instagram. Now journals are saying, okay, if you're on social media, we'll make an exception. But this is so important. As the media itself changes, there are new problems that come up. So, Poet at Large, you've done an exceptional job today.
Thank you. It was so much fun. I'm going to relax now and listen to the wonderful presentation of Anique and enjoy myself very, very, very much. Thank you both.
Thank you, Poet at Large. Until next time. And Anique, I want to read from another writer's comments, Sean Nevin, about your work to start off this segment of the show. Here the reader enters room after room of discovery. These poems, like little vestibules, exist between moments that illuminate the inner life, between daylight and darkness, past and present, between the living and the dead, between a daughter and the memory of a father. I thought that was exquisitely written and very, very true about your poems, how they are rooms, how each, and I've made comments about your work too, how reading them aloud, one after another, is very transformative for the reader, and the effect is cumulative. So I thank you for that. You have described to me also, Anique, in our conversations about, and we talked about your creative life, but not quite this way. You talked about your creative life as rooms leading to other rooms.
There was a point where I was sort of overwhelmed with business and things in my life that felt that were taking me away from what I loved. And I thought I would never get to the writing and the depth I wanted. So I started working early in the morning before, at 5 and putting in 2 or 3 hours. And what happened was it changed from wanting to get something done and being ambitious to being completely devoted to the work. And everything I did, some days bad work, sometimes good, but I would open it up and say, that's interesting. What's that? Where will this go? Where will that go? Or research this. And that was when all of the rooms started to open, the emotional, science, history, that anything became material, how things are made, numbers. So I'm in my mid-70s and I was approaching 77.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked that up and it turned out to be a huge biblical number. And then also a new age number, 7 days, creation.
Oh.
So I started a book that's collaged where each poem is 77 words, and it's a full length. There's 77 poems in the book. So the book in itself is a project, which is its own room, but then within it, each poem is a separate world or many separate worlds. So, yeah.
Anique, so was Civil Twilight a catalyst for this new project?
Civil Twilight happened while I was doing that. Is when I was working, there would be a lot of material. I would, instead of writing a poem in linear concentration, I would write lines and I would research and I would bring in journals and I would bring in thoughts or thoughts that would come up when I was driving or taking a shower. I would collect lines. And then nuggets and the lines would come up. They'd almost float up. And I would say, well, that's a nugget. That's bright. That's beautiful. And what if I put it next to this? And that's how it was able to make the 30-line poems.
So
the 30 word.
All these inform, so everything informs everything else in a way.
Yeah.
I was so struck by what you said about the time that you spend every day as a daily practice takes you away from what we all have is ambition in the outer world, and how that removes you from that. Of course, you need the content and your excitement and your creative life in order to fulfill any ambition you may have. But I love the idea that the work itself is separate from the ambition. And I think that's very important. For me, it's important.
Yes, I think actually the work is everything. And that's where the life is, and the restoration and the development and the growth and the love of the words and the phrases that sound, the image and the metaphors. But one can move ahead beautifully, staying within the work. It's almost like if you were an acrobat or on the balance beam, you have to focus on the act of what you're doing yourself. If you're doing, well, from my point of view, if you're doing it to get ahead, there's no life, there's no color or sound or feeling in that. Mm-hmm. It's always has to be in the work.
That's wonderful, Anique. And living in the moment. That's truly living in the moment when you're feeling that way, when you're doing the work for the work itself. Anique, you have to talk about your 30-year plan.
So I actually, can I talk about the Centenaria Diary?
Okay, the whole thing, everything's
About
contained
it.
in your brand new website. That's quite wonderful.
Okay, right. So what's going on is that the book, which came from devotion, has actually given me a ticket to open doors. And one of them is to put up my website. And on the website, there's a blog with 3 different sections. And the sections are, one is creative conniption. I changed the title. And that's on creativity, talking about what I teach. And it's about craft and things like that. The next one is on the Centenaria Diary. And Centenaria is my 100-year-old self. And what it is because of, she's got long, great white hair down to her waist, and she still dances. So so I lost a lot of years with illness, and I want to make up. I want the years back. So I want 30 years of creative work, which takes me well into 100.
Yay!
And, yay! And so that's about living well and purpose going into our continuing chapters, especially our 3rd and 4th chapters. And the other thing on the blog is a serialized book. And with the alphabet book, there is going to be a full color plate each month of my artwork, and then a poem, and then journal exploration. And as it says, we enter into the different worlds of a new letter every month. And in 2 years, it will be a full book. So if you sign up for the newsletter.
Yes, sign up.
Sign up, and then you can be part of all of this. So this is part of what the book has triggered.
Oh, it's fantastic. And I've seen many of these illustrations. It's absolutely exquisite. They remind me of illuminated manuscripts, really. I don't know.
I love illuminated.
Yeah, I mean, I love that 30-year plan. And the fact that it's a diary, I love that aspect of it. And do you want to talk a little bit about the illness that you had? That you still struggle with in terms of your writing?
Well, it's a conglomeration of different challenges that were actually happened from birth. So I don't want to go into all that.
Sure.
But what I will say is that it really focused me because I couldn't do things. I couldn't be out and about in the city every night like my friends. And so I concentrated on my art and my studies and my writing. And it's brought me some of the biggest challenges, which also gives me the resiliency to work on my writing. When you have challenges, it brings out a lot of strength if you get through.
Yes.
Also, I've learned a lot about health, and that will be showing up in Centenaria's diary for sure. And I do Qigong every day. It's wonderful.
Yes, that's an important part of your life. And it's fantastic that you do that.
It's great. Yeah.
Anique, would you read the last poem of the book, please?
This is called Civil Twilight. Saturday sundown. Headlights glimmer into Parkway's still blue mirror. Incremental shadows of the dead. Father's hand gently caresses my forehead. You do me wonders, he whispers, before he disappears again.
That's Anique Sara Taylor reading her poem, Civil Twilight. And that's such a poignant ending. It wraps up, so to speak, the whole book. Did you have to think about ending the book with this poem, Anique?
It fell in so naturally, and I felt it was an ending point, maybe even when I started to put the book together, because it was one of the sweet gifts that he gave me, those words that stayed with me after he died, and it was a glow that lasted, and outlasted the good and the bad. I'd worked with very young children who were frustrated with speech. And so when my dad started having strokes, he couldn't talk and he was shy to talk with other people. But I was very patient. And so he started pouring out his life in stroke speech. And the stroke speech was so poetic. So he couldn't say, "Thank you. I really appreciate your help." He could say, "You do me wonders."
Oh,
And it's so beautiful. So thank you, Dad, for the great line.
it's beautiful. Beautiful. Anique, what upcoming events do you have in the near future?
There's the blog, which I unashamedly am pushing. But November 2nd, there's a reading at Rosedale Library with the wonderful Lisa Kiernan and Lissa Christina St. John. And on November 3rd to 5th is the Writers in the Mountains Literary Retreat, and I will be on call the whole time with the journal workshop room. And then on, what's the date?
November 18th?
Thank you. November 18th, Rhine Cliff Morton Memorial Library. You've got to come. It's the most gorgeous historic building.
It's a beautiful building.
And that I'm going to be giving a free community journal workshop class. And after that is a poetry reading with Lissa Kiernan and the illustrious Sharon Israel.
I'm so excited.
Illustrious.
That should be great. Well, this was a wonderful show, Anique. Thank you so much. I am so pleased with our work together today, and I really am very honored that you're on the show. So thank you very much. Thank you, Pamela Manché Pearce, Poet at Large, and thank you so much for listening. If you would like more information about Anique Sara Taylor and her books, Civil Twilight and Where Space Bends, go to her website, AniqueSaraTaylor, no space.com.